Okay, so I'm just going to dig through these various compost bins and trials that I've got going on right now, and show you some things. As I said, I am a little shy or reluctant to show these because I want to be sure you have a full understanding of what you're looking at and why it is in the condition that it's in. So the first two piles I'm going to show you are from the two bins that I explained when I turned them the third time. I filled the one bin up completely. The other one was about 2/3 full. The full bin, basically those two bins were basically the same material. So the full bin did heat up to about 120 fairly easily, and the bin that was 2/3 full did not barely heat it up. So I put in fresh organic matter to fill the rest of the bin, and then the material on the bottom did begin to heat up. And so my focus this year on all the trials was more aimed at understanding moisture, aeration, and nitrogen content. And also I just want to say too, there's a lot of things that I've done with these compost trials that I'm not going to tell you. It's not because I want to hide something or keep you from knowing. It's that I really don't want you to think that you need to do this with your compost pile. So here we have a handful. So there's a big stick that I put in. I put lots of big pieces of wood in my compost piles so that I could make a comparison of see how the microbes are actually getting into these pieces of wood. This one here, you could hear it. I broke it and it snapped, and if you can see that, wait, it's gonna focus here, like it's quite black. Okay, so that there is probably pretty close to fully decomposed as far as the microbes that function in the warm and hot stages. And the crack was probably due to the fibers that won't get broken down until it's into the cold stage. Now we're gonna go down here a little bit. So this one's still warm. There's another big stick. Again, if you can see that, you can see there's a part that's a little lighter right there, but it's also quite discolored. The center of it is quite black, and more or less most of the plant matter is gone. So these are my second oldest. These ones were piled, created in July and August. And see, there's some leaves that are matted together, and I'm doing this with one hand. There's hardly any strength left to those leaves whatsoever. So by the time I turn this in the spring, there are some wood chips in there. Those are also from chainsaw cutting, and they're probably pine, so they might be harder to decompose. But I will get a few more pieces of wood in here. Again, so the fineness of the wood pieces, there's a piece that just snapped real easily. I hope I got that in the camera there. It's quite black inside. So as I said, here is this is like the middle of November, and this is a pile that I started at the beginning of November. It mostly consisted of chainsaw sawdust from processing firewood, and some of the shredded up wood chips over here and lower in the pile that I produced with the lawnmower. There was not a lot of green material in here, but I did put the remainder or the byproducts of slaughtering my last 8 chickens for this season. This pile, despite the outside temperatures being very cold, there's not a lot of insulation, 1-inch thick styrofoam, and it has cooled slightly from a couple of days ago, because we've had a few really cold nights. There you can see to the depth of the compost thermometer, it's still rising, and it's just going over 140 degrees. I'm going to pull the thermometer out. That is 3/4 of the length of that thermometer out of the pile, and the temperature is still over, let's see here, it's still almost 145. So that's just to show you the effect of, first of all, the mass amount of biological activity that's going in here right now is generating that heat, and this 1-inch insulation panel is allowing that heat to stay in the pile and stay warm. Now we're going to go lift this other side up a little bit, and we're going to just check a little closer to the outer edge of the pile. So here again, it's still moving slightly, so it's hit 140 degrees right there, and that is about 9 inches from the side. So it's still in the hot temperature. Now we're going to go about I didn't pre-plan this either. So now we're about 4 or 5 inches from the edge, and it's still pretty close to hot. I'll push that down a little further, see what happens. See, it's a little cooler further down near the outside. Now, in the summer, those temperatures, as I said, they were in the hot range, within an inch or two of the edge, or all the way to the edge of the styrofoam. So it's a little harder for this pile to stay warm because of the cold, but I mean, show me another compost pile that someone made open or just in skids or what have you that has maintained that hot temperature now for, well, about 15 days. And we've had a lot of below freezing weather already, and it's still cooking away. So here's another bin that I've got that I started near the beginning of November, or just a few days into November. I've been collecting leaf bags around the neighborhood. So this is a pile that is only leaves. I'm gonna leaves and the paper bags that they came in. I did add a little bit of nitrogen as I was building the pile, and added moisture, and we'll show you what the temperature is of this in a minute. So here is only leaves, and it is in the hot zone, at least in the center. I didn't check this beforehand, so you're seeing this with me. So I pulled the thermometer out halfway, and its temperature is going down slightly, but very slowly. So we still have near hot temperatures at the top. Now we're going to go about 9 inches from the edge, and so it's quite cold in here. So that's just a little bit below the hot temperature. And take another sample near the front. And this is only about 4 or 5 inches from the edge. And the thermometer is going up a little bit. So it's pretty close to the hot temperatures. So another thing that I think is really important to discuss is pests. So a lot of other methods of composting tend to have a lot of pest problems. Here where I live, the biggest pests I have are raccoons and mice, moles, voles, and insects. So just what I've experienced here through the trials this year, and it's not the same as what was going on with the other composting bins and various composting methods that I was using. So I know the raccoon is still around. He goes through other stuff. He's never gone into a bin. There is a problem with mice, moles, and voles. The biggest problem is not that they're finding something to eat, is because these are warm. They're nesting, and so I've had to set up traps because in a previous prototype of this, I had some problems with mice chewing away some of the styrofoam to make nests. I haven't had that problem with this model because it's a little different than the other one was. However, I still decided to trap them because I want to make this styrofoam last as long as possible. And when you trap them, you can just put them into the compost. Now, I live in a place where there's not a lot of dangerous things around here. But for people who live where it's warm, and especially when it comes to snakes, the garter snakes love hanging around here all summer. I've seen them that they've gone up into the piles. They're very warm, and because of the nesting mice and voles and moles and so forth, they're finding lots of food, probably insects also. But if you live in a place where you have dangerous snakes, when you go to check on your compost pile, you're going to want to use a stick and stay at a distance when you lift the lids, because there is a good chance that somebody's going to have snakes going up into these bins underneath the styrofoam because it is nice and toasty warm. The insects that I've had in here, so I haven't had a pile that is like just kitchen scraps or just animal byproducts. However, I have put those things into the piles, and to keep everything away, you just need a very thin layer of other organic material, either being wood chips or leaves or even grass clippings or something like that, because these piles heat up so well and so fast. I believe that what will draw creatures in to eat the things that you've put in there, there doesn't seem to be evidence yet of that happening. And again, back to insects, what happens is here, because of the cool nights, what I've witnessed is that insects will congregate underneath the styrofoam where it's nice and warm. In fact, as I said, we've had a lot of frost. I lifted the other bin here that I started in the beginning of November, and when I lifted it, there was like literally hundreds and hundreds of probably fruit flies or some other flies, whatever. They're doing well underneath the styrofoam, but I don't see any evidence of reproduction in larvae, so that's a positive thing. And as far as odors go, I have not yet experienced any annoying odors from any of these bins. As I said, I have put early this year, I had one pile going, and I had a chicken that died, and I put that chicken in there, and by the time I turned the pile, there was no evidence left of the chicken. And all I did was make a hole in the middle and make sure he was covered with a few inches of what was in the compost bin. and that was fine. No smell whatsoever. The only smells that I have had is when I've put a large quantity of grass clippings in when I've mowed the grass. I try to mix some other materials in with them, but basically when I've had large quantities of grass clippings in these bins, then the odor that comes off of them smells like a hayfield after the hay's been cut and it's drying. So nothing annoying. The other thing, another thing I'd like to talk to you about is everyone's on the bandwagon of remineralization, and I really believe that that this is good sound science, that most of our agricultural lands and lands in general are depleted, and this is one of the primary causes of disease vulnerability and pest vulnerability, and has a big effect on the overall health and growth and productivity of plants. I will tell you that I have incorporated some rock dust into my piles, basalt being the main one. I did have some green sand, but I can't get that in my area anymore, or for the moment. But as far as remineralization goes, I want you to think about a couple of other things. We're talking a lot of what's lacking in our soils are some trace minerals, and these are important because in some plants it's not so much that they need to be part of the plant that we eat, the part of the plant that we eat. It's not necessarily to be in there. Some of these trace minerals are in the plant to create chemical reactions for the plant to be able to produce other substances and compounds and so on and so forth. Talking about introducing minerals back into your garden, using the compost pile is a good way. If you're putting your rock dust in at the beginning and it's going through, it's being part of that hot process, and being there as the humus is forming, the humus is going to have a better chance of hanging on to any mineral molecules or atoms that are broken off of the rock dust. The humus will be able to hold on to it, and when you put it in the garden, it's going to stay there. It's not going to be leached away by water. Any of the rock dust that doesn't break down over time will be broken down by the microbes that work with your plants, and they will mine out the minerals that the plant is looking for. But just some quick other ideas about remineralization. So you've got this composter set up, and you know that you're going to have be able to sustain those hot temperatures for quite some time. So it opens the door to a lot of things that I didn't like putting in my compost before. So we're talking a lot about weeds. So if there's a handful of people on the internet right now talking about weeds and medicinal herbs and some of the trace minerals and things that can be found in these various plants. But just in general, now I see things as viable inputs into my compost pile that I really didn't want to before, and one of those, or some of them, are being weeds. Seeds. Let those plants mature and produce seeds, because nutrient density in a seed is much greater than in the plant itself. Another thing is I have a wood stove, and I'll talk about ashes in general in a minute, but I burn some skids, use them for kindling, or I burn a certain amount of skids in my wood stove. And I've seen the material analysis of mild steel for nail making, and So I used to sift through my ashes with a magnet and take the nails out, crush up the charcoal pieces that were left in there, and then put that into my compost. What I have been doing is keeping the iron filings, the small bits of iron that have oxidized and broken away from the nails because of the combustion or because of the heat and oxidization that happens in the wood stove. So I'm pretty confident that that those iron filings are making a contribution to remineralization, and the material of the chemical analysis of the steel used for nails has quite a broad spectrum of trace minerals and some of the heavy metals that plants actually use for their chemical reactions. But what I'm going to be doing, and I started in that last pile that I talked about, is I'm putting in my ashes with the nails included, and I'm going to see how much more oxidization those nails are going to go through when they're in the compost pile. And before I use the compost, obviously I'm going to screen it and make sure that there's no nails going into the garden, because I tried that once by just putting my ashes straight into the garden with the nails, and it takes a couple of years for the nails to disappear. Another story of remineralization. So a lot of people are I've actually discovered that there's a lot of people in our industrialized modern world here that are faced with dealing with human waste, either because the systems that we all typically use are not available to them and not affordable. They're broken, but people are composting their human waste. And if you think about it, if you're a homesteader or you're a gardener and you're doing it all for yourself, I know people get grossed out about using human waste in compost, but that's kind of silly. If you think about it, you've got good healthy soil, you've remineralized it with rock dust or whatever, and you're harvesting the food to eat and consume yourself or to feed to your animals, and all of basically all of the minerals are staying more or less within your individual community. You put all the minerals and stuff that you need eventually come out of your body. You put that into your compost. So when you put your compost back in your garden, you're really creating a closed loop that probably won't require a lot of additional inputs once you've made your soil healthy. So this is a concept of, this is what recycling really is. So the other thing I want to talk about is ashes. So I have personally spoken to some people that either put ashes into their gardens. I'm talking like over my lifetime. So they've done it when I was younger. They've done it for a long period of time. I've read a few some literature, and I think in books. So there are some people that swear it's one of the best things you can do to your garden, and there are some people that are saying no, never put ashes in your garden, and this, that, and the other. So the really interesting thing that I have thought of, and what I am going to not speculate but assume that the main reason people that were putting ashes into their garden, the main reason it made such a difference, and talking to these people, listening to what they're describing, what about disease and pests, about productivity, about longevity of the growing season, as far as the plants not getting stressed and dying before the growing season is up, and all the benefits. They have a lot to do with mineralization of the soil. However, ashes don't have a broad spectrum of trace minerals unless you're you know, you're talking about nails or the leaves of the trees, where a lot of the minerals are in too. So I believe that the main thing that's creating those amazing results is the fact that if you have an average wood stove, when you look at your ashes, you're going to see a lot of black pieces in there. So you've got a considerable amount of biochar or charcoal. And now, if you know anything about biochar, and I've made biochar here, and I will share my retort kiln or oven that I made with you eventually. I have put biochar into my garden rows at a rate of about 1 to 2%. I have 30-inch wide market garden rows, and I've worked it into a depth of 8 to 10 inches. And as I say, biochar is also a form of stable carbon. So it's going to do the same job as what the humus will do. So as far as putting ashes into your compost, I think it's a great idea. I'm going to suggest you don't put it too heavy, and also keep in mind, I am not mixing my inputs, I am layering them. I have some theories or good reasons for doing that, and I'm not prepared to explain that yet until I've had a chance to do some other trials. But I would suggest that when you're putting your material in fresh, because it's going to compress a lot, at about 1 foot of material, you could put, say, 1 to 2 liters of ashes, whatever, you know, with whatever charcoal bits are in there, and don't exceed that, because if you know ashes, you can produce lye with that, and it can be kind of rough on the microbes. But in the piles where I did that, I saw no evidence of diminished microbial activity. So that is good. Go ahead and put your ashes into your compost pile. So in my first video, I was talking about the engineering, the decision to use 1-inch thick styrofoam as the insulator, saying that to get a higher insulating value, you would have to go quite a bit thicker on the styrofoam, and I didn't see the value in that. And if you live in a cold climate, I suggested that the best would be to put a high tunnel or a greenhouse over top, or put your composting in a tunnel or greenhouse. And I thought I was showing you my oldest compost earlier, and I was really showing you my second oldest compost. And so I can't read my own notes. I keep track of which piles what, and I made a mistake, and I discovered that my oldest compost was in this bin and not that bin, and or sorry, not this bin. And it's something really interesting about the idea that a greenhouse would make a big difference of what's going on, and it would extend your composting season. Here's a great example to show how just a little bit of protection from the cold can make a big difference. In this bin over here, and in that center bin in my 5-unit composting setup, it is the same material. Okay, that one has the contamination of the new organic matter that I introduced because it was the bin that was 2/3 full. However, that bin there has a greater capacity because it has new material in to heat up. And currently, with the cold weather, that bin is, the center of the pile is at about 60 degrees. And it is open, so all sides are exposed to the cold air, even though there's the insulation from the styrofoam. This bin in the center here, the only difference is that it's protected from either side. So there's less cold air coming in contact with the side because it's blocked, and there's wood blocking the rear because of how I built my composting unit. And the same material in this bin is at 110 degrees currently. So there is not a lot of additional protection, but it makes a significant difference in how the temperature of the pile, which is going to speed up the decomposition process. So here's a little experiment I'd just like to share with you. It's just to prove something that, as I was saying before, often people are concerned that they need to get in there in their compost piles and dig around and get more air in them, because the composting process is an aerobic process, and people think that when their compost pile stinks, it's because it's anaerobic, and that's not necessarily true. As I explained before, the major cause for an anaerobic compost pile is the pile is too small, and there's heat and humidity leaving in all directions, and it can never heat up enough to dry out the part that's too wet. Just show you though, the definition of aerobic is simply, scientifically speaking, is something that exists in the presence of oxygen. So it doesn't really tell you how much oxygen is necessary at that point. Like we breathe air to get oxygen. We probably need a lot more oxygen than the aerobes that are functioning in the compost pile. But anyways, so just to show you, so that you're not concerned with thinking that there's not enough air and oxygen in your pile, what I've done here is I've taken some canning jars. So I have two sets of jars here. They're these two sets, each jar is the same size. I took some compost from my oldest compost pile, and I did not pack it in very much with my fingers. What I did was I hit it very hard on my fist to create the sort of the compaction that would be normal from the result of you turning the compost pile, because this is pretty advanced compost here. There's a lot of humus in there already, and humus retains its structure very well, so it when you put it into your soil, obviously it's going to keep a lot of spaces open for air and water to be. These are just leaves. I don't have, like I said, I don't have a lot of green material left in the garden, but I pushed these leaves in very tightly with my fingers and compacted them very well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour water into each jar, and you're going to see just how much air is in there by how much of the volume of water has been used up in the jar with the water. So I'm going to get in real close here, and then we're going to do this experiment. I've never done this before, so we're doing this together for the first time. So first I'm going to do the leaves. I'll just make sure I basically filled both jars up till just where the neck of the jar starts. I'm going to take and start pouring some water in here. Try not to lose water off onto the tray. Just starting to, all right, so the water level is just getting to where the neck is. All right, so you can see how much water I used out of this jar to fill this jar up here. Let's see, oh, it settled. Put a little bit more. All right. So it's just to show you that in these this jar of compressed leaves, the amount of air that is in there is roughly equal to the amount of water that I emptied out of this jar, and it filled all the spaces in between all the leaves, or if you can imagine your compost pile, all the spaces in between all the organic matter that you're piling in there. So there is quite a volume of air in this jar. So we're going to move that one aside and bring in the mature compost. And this is, when I was showing you earlier my compost piles, saying that this was my oldest compost in the 5-bin unit that I was showing you, I was actually taking in the wrong pile. This is actually my oldest compost, and I'm going to show you some of it close up on a piece of paper here in a minute. But we'll do the aeration experiment with this material here. Okay, so I'm going to pour the water in. I'm going to guess there probably might be a little bit of settling in the material. As I say, I did not try to compact it with my hands. I tried to simulate the level of compaction that this would have experienced as you're turning your pile. So here we go. Oh, I lost a couple of drops of water on the side there. This jar doesn't pour as nice as the first one did. It's not settling too much. Okay, so it's pretty much up to the neck here now, and I still see a few bubbles coming out of it, and the water didn't compact it very much as the water was going in, so that's a very good sign. One of the things that's telling me is there's a good amount of humus in here. Because, so as I was saying that earlier, I was showing you my oldest compost, and what I was really showing you was my second oldest compost. It's kind of embarrassing because I have notes to keep track of what each bin is and what I did with it, and sometimes I can't read my own handwriting. So I brought some inside because it's too cold to be doing this outside like it was the other day, and I would just like to show you basically the state of decomposition of this particular pile. I'm going to keep this separate here. So here we go. This compost has had about 2.5 months of hot temperatures, and this compost was interrupted or disrupted and distressed in many different ways. I was mostly with aeration experiments and humidity experiments, like letting this pile dried out considerably two times. The first 2 times when I turned it. So it is not the optimal compost, as I said. I'm trying to work out at exactly what is the proper, or what's the best time, the amount of time to let it sit and then turn it, how much humidity to put into it. But I'm very proud of this compost, because even a majority of the wood is quite decomposed. And I'm going to make a close-up here, and I'm just going to go through some of this and let you see a few different things here. So just looking close up, there's a little bit of contamination. That's a leaf that I filled the top of the bin with leaves this fall to give it a little bit of insulation so that it could keep the biology in there, keep working as long as possible. You can still recognize quite a few pieces of wood, but there's an old decomposed leaf. There's hardly any strength left to that. It's still retaining its shape because there's fibers in the leaf that does not get broken down by the microbes that function in the hot and warm stages. Here is a piece of wood that has still quite a bit of structural integrity. It's still pretty tough. Here is a little twig. This is probably wood that is very difficult to decompose, along with this, although that was fairly soft. This here, this was a piece of wood, and I broke it. It's very black inside, and this was one of the larger pieces of wood that I'm talking about. And if you can see here, I'm crumbling this, and it's still got some tough fibers in it. And again, these are fibers that need to be broken down in the cold stage by the funguses and things that will thrive in that stage. But that was a piece of wood. It's pretty crumbly. There's still a fairly tough piece of wood chip there, but you can see there's I don't even know what that is. Oh, that's a wood chip too. But in here, most of the smaller wood chips, this one here, just no effort whatsoever, and it's almost completely crumbly. There's no effort required at all. This one here, it's hard to see, but it's very dark inside. So it's at a very advanced stage of decomposition. As I was saying, by the time these are finished, they'll still be somewhat stuck together, and that's why the large composting facilities use shredders and screeners to break this stuff up. That's a twig there that there took no effort to snap that. But in general here, there's no more that snapped with a little bit of sound, but here it's squishy, and when I squeezed it, there was water, quite a bit of water in it. And that's another thing you have to remember when you're talking about hydration and adding water to your compost pile. In the early stages, it's going to use a lot of water. In the latter stages, as you get humus and as the wood decomposes, it hangs on to a lot of water. I've found that this doesn't look very wet because it's all crumbly, but there's a tremendous amount of humidity retained in there. That was another wood chip, a small one, and it just crumbles as soon as I touch it. So I was talking about the humidity because when you turn your piles as they progress, you have to be very careful not to overwater them, because too much moisture will stop the composting process. And I had a couple of piles that I also overwatered, and there was nothing there. I had left one there for 2 months and it never heated up again. The only way to deal with that is to take it apart and let it dry out and start over again, or simply mix it into a new pile. So you don't want to overhydrate your piles. But this is really awesome stuff. I'm pretty excited about this. And when I screen it, it's going to take out those last wood chips. So I just want to talk about the cycle of CO2 in the atmosphere real quick, and why composting is valuable. I was reading a biologist talking about where our surplus oxygen comes from in our atmosphere, and it really comes from the ocean. A lot of people believe that the surplus oxygen comes from the plant life that's growing on the surface of land. And he was basically saying that, yeah, there is a certain amount of oxygen that comes from plant growth, but in the overall life of a plant, and he was using trees as an example, a tree fixes a lot of CO2 and releases oxygen, and when the tree dies and decomposes over a long period of time, all the microbes and the funguses and everything that's breaking that tree down consume oxygen, and basically and release CO2. So the CO2 that was fixed in that tree over its growth, its living lifetime, eventually ends up back in the atmosphere after it is fully decomposed. And that's pretty much true for all or most plant material on the surface of land. So he basically said that the surplus oxygen that is in the atmosphere that we're breathing really comes from the ocean, and he was saying how important it is to begin looking at the harm we're doing to the ocean and the ecosystems there, because they're much more important to our survival than the plant material on the surface of land, except for, and as I said, composting is unnatural. Making a compost pile, regardless of what system you're using, is an unnatural phenomenon. When Mother Nature piles a lot of organic matter up, other things are made from it. And so composting is kind of an anomaly that we're doing, but it does have the capacity to keep CO2 or carbon that was captured, and we put that back into the soil, and it can stay there for a very, very long time. So now I'd like to just talk about something that maybe gives you a bit of a challenge. So I've been talking about the fact that, you know, you're putting your plant material into your compost bin, you're using a good system, or my system, and you're getting the high temperatures and you're getting a high humus content. So science, just the good information that I have looked up, they're saying that high quality compost ends up being 50 to 60% humus. So this here is a 4 foot cubed, 64 cubic feet. So 50 to 60% here. That humus, it's carbon. The carbon comes from the plants taking up CO2 and fixing it. It gets in here, the microbes work on it, and the carbon stays in here. That carbon doesn't go back into the atmosphere. Like charcoal, it's stable unless you burn it, okay? But once it's in the soil, it has a pretty low risk of being ignited. So I'm assuming that the carbon from organic matter, the humus, is also flammable. So you've got this cycle going. So you've got your 50% or 60% humus. That carbon is not going back into the atmosphere. It's going into your ground. You're improving your soil. You're going to get more vigorous and healthier plant growth. You're going to get healthier food to make you better, healthier, and you're going to cycle those plants back into here. All right, so there's a way to calculate how much CO2 that you're capturing and keeping from going back into the atmosphere. Now, I was watching a lecture, and a man was talking about if we just took all of the current agricultural land that is for food production, and I believe that includes grazing land for animals, and we converted that to regenerative agriculture, where you're not tilling anymore, but you're planting species of plants. They're doing things like keyline plowing to break the hard pan. Then they're doing also grazing and follow up with poultry, and what they're doing with hogs. But basically, they're fixing a ton of organic matter into the ground. And if we just did that and converted all the farms and agricultural land to regenerative, that we could get the CO2 levels back to pre-industrial levels in 7 years. So I know currently that is the hot topic of what is threatening the human race and everything else that lives on this planet is the fact that we're getting too much CO2 into the atmosphere. You know, in my lifetime, there's a long list of things that I've been conditioned to live in fear: nuclear war, the ozone layer, economic collapse. Like, it just goes on and on. If you feel helpless, and you think there's nothing you can do, but you want to do something, and you're producing food, this is a great way. If you you can get the information to calculate it out, but if you calculated how much CO2 you're taking out of the air and keeping, and then said, okay, tomorrow 1 million people start making compost in a way that makes a high humus content, or 50 million people, and you get a calculator out, you're going to see that is going to make a tremendous amount of difference in what's going on in our atmosphere. So, I know that it's common to believe that CO2 is a problem because of industrialization and overpopulation. Me personally, those are not the problems; those are the symptoms, and we keep only dealing with symptoms. And I believe that someday people are going to be ready to start talking about what the real problem is, and when that happens, it's going to be great. But in the meantime, if you want to do something to help deal with the symptom of rising CO2 levels in our atmosphere, this is a great way to make a legitimate, solid contribution. And while people are flying around the world and staying in $500 a night hotels to talk about our climate problems, by the way, talking releases a tremendous amount of CO2, so maybe if we could get them to shut up and make some compost, we'll make a significant difference in our atmosphere. So, in closing, I would just like to say my main composting season is over for me, and it won't resume until beginning of April of next year. So I won't have really anything new and spectacular to share with anybody over the winter. In the spring, it's going to be kind of interesting because a couple of the oldest piles, they heated up to about 110, 120 the last time I turned them. So I'd say a majority of the pile is decomposed in regards to the microbes that work in the warm and hot temperatures. And what I've done is I put a handful of red wigglers in each bin. So I'm going to see what happens over the winter. Obviously, if you live in a warmer climate, you're not dealing with the cold weather, and you're going to have a much longer composting season. And when the weather does cool off, the cold, the microbes and biology that does better in the cold is going to take over and keep working for you during the cold season. So I'm really eager to see what happens over the winter, and when I actually turn some of these piles in the spring when they've defrosted. I just want to end with this. Since the trials that I've been doing and actually experiencing real good composting and real intense biological activity, and seeing firsthand something that I've never seen before through experience. I've only seen the end results at some of the composting facilities that I visited. I've already done a little bit of research, so firsthand now, knowing from experience what's actually really going on, I found it was a lot easier to weed out bad sources of information from good sources of information. And I'm very committed to seeing this through and making this compost a high quality finished compost for myself. But I'm also very committed to making sure that what I'm sharing with you is the best quality information that I could possibly give you. So through the winter, I'm going to do some research, because some of the information that I'm after is not readily available. I'm going to have to go into some probably some textbooks and other sources that are not necessarily easily accessible over the internet. And some of the things that I have explained to you in the videos up until now, some of it I tried to stay a bit vague, because I would prefer to refine my understanding with the correct terminology and a correct scientific understanding of what's going on. And I'll be back to share that with you in the springtime when all this gets kickstarted again. So for now, I hope that you can get your composting system like what I've shown you here started, and start seeing some results that you haven't seen before, and get excited. And I'll be back with more